There is a piece of surveillance footage in the Jennifer Kesse investigation that lasts only seconds. It shows a black Chevrolet Malibu arriving at an apartment complex in Orlando. The person behind the wheel parks. They remain inside the vehicle briefly. Then they get out and walk away. That should have been a breakthrough. Because the car did not belong to them. It belonged to 24-year-old Jennifer Kesse, who had disappeared 2 days earlier. And investigators had something they rarely get in a disappearance. A recording of the person who appeared to have moved her car. There was just one problem. Every time the person passed behind the fence blocked their face. The camera captured the person. It captured their clothing. It captured their movement. But the one thing investigators needed most, their identity, remained hidden. 20 years later, Jennifer Kesse has still not been found. And that piece of footage remains one of the most important clues in a case that has never produced an arrest or a confirmed explanation. Jennifer Joyce Kesse was 24 years old in January 2006. She lived in Orlando, Florida, in the Mosaic at Millennia condominium complex, and worked in finance for a company associated with Westgate Resorts. She was young, independent, and building the kind of life many people in their 20s are trying to establish. A career, her own home, relationships, plans for the future. There was nothing about January 23, 2006, that suggested it would be the last ordinary day of her life. Jennifer had just returned from a weekend trip to St. Croix with her boyfriend, Rob Allen, and friends. On Monday, January 23, she went to work. She finished her day and returned home. She spoke with members of her family. Later that night, she spoke with Allen by phone. The call ended around 10 p.m. It was the last known communication between Jennifer and her boyfriend. At that moment, there was no obvious warning that anything was wrong. The next morning, Jennifer was expected at work. But she didn't arrive. At first, a missed morning at work might have seemed like an ordinary problem. A delayed commute. An alarm that didn't go off. A forgotten appointment. But Jennifer's absence quickly became alarming because it was so unlike her normal routine. Her employer contacted her family. Calls were made. Jennifer did not answer. And eventually, her family went to her condominium. What they found there created the first major puzzle. The apartment did not look like a place where someone had decided to disappear. There was no obvious sign of a struggle inside. Her belongings suggested she had gone through at least part of her normal morning routine. The FBI later documented that Jennifer's phone, another phone, iPod, keys, driver's license and purse were among the items missing from her residence. Her car was missing too. That detail would become crucial. Because if Jennifer had simply left Orlando voluntarily, investigators would need to determine where she had gone. But if someone had taken her, the car might tell them something about what happened. And 2 days later, it did. On January 26, Jennifer's black 2004 Chevrolet Malibu was discovered at Huntington on the Green, an apartment complex roughly a mile from her home. Jennifer was not inside. She was not found nearby. But the car immediately became evidence. The vehicle had not simply been abandoned in some remote location. Someone had driven it there. And investigators eventually found surveillance footage showing a person parking it. This changed the shape of the investigation. Jennifer had disappeared. Her car had traveled approximately a mile. And somebody appeared to have brought it there after she was gone. The question became brutally simple. Who drove Jennifer's car? The surveillance footage seemed as though it might answer that question. Instead, it created one of the strangest visual clues in the entire case. The person exits the Malibu and begins walking away. But the camera's view is obstructed by a fence. As the person moves through the scene, the fence repeatedly blocks the individual's face. The footage captured a human being without giving investigators a usable face. The FBI still publicly displays the surveillance image as part of its missing person case. It is difficult to overstate how frustrating that must have been. Because this wasn't a situation where there was no footage. There was footage. There was a person. There was a vehicle. There was a location. There was a timeline. And yet the central question remained unanswered. Who was that person? Jennifer's disappearance created another problem. Investigators could establish parts of her life before she vanished. They could establish that she had been home. They could establish that she was expected at work. They could establish that her car later appeared about a mile away. But somewhere between those points was an enormous gap. A gap measured not in days, not in weeks, but in hours. Jennifer's family has long maintained that she was taken shortly after leaving her condominium. The FBI's public case information confirms that she was reported missing after failing to appear for work and that the surveillance footage showed a person of interest walking away from her car after it was parked at the nearby complex. But there is an important distinction here. The available evidence does not publicly establish exactly where Jennifer was abducted, who abducted her, or what happened to her afterward. Those questions remain unresolved. That uncertainty has allowed theories to multiply over the years. One theory focused on people working around Jennifer's condominium. At the time, construction and renovation activity was taking place in the area. That naturally drew attention to workers who might have had familiarity with the property. But familiarity with the area is not proof of involvement. And no publicly identified construction worker has been established as Jennifer's abductor. This distinction matters. A theory can be plausible enough to investigate without being strong enough to call a fact. The person captured on surveillance became one of the most recognizable unknown figures in the case. But recognition is not identification. The image is famous precisely because investigators can see so little. Over the years, attempts were made to extract more information from the footage. The limitations were technological as much as investigative. The original surveillance equipment was decades behind what modern cameras can capture. The image quality could not simply be transformed into a perfect photograph. That is important because modern audiences sometimes assume that if an image is blurry, technology can automatically make it clear. It cannot recover information that the original recording never captured. And for years, the footage remained frustratingly limited. The person was there, but their identity remained out of reach. For Jennifer's parents, the disappearance became more than a search. It became a decades-long campaign for answers. They continued pushing for information about what investigators had found and what remained unresolved. Eventually, that fight moved into court. In 2018, Jennifer's parents filed a lawsuit against the Orlando Police Department seeking access to investigative records. The dispute centered on the family's desire to obtain the case materials and pursue their own investigative efforts. In March 2019, an agreement was reached under which the family would receive investigative documents, audio and video records. The significance of that development was enormous. After years of waiting, Jennifer's family gained access to thousands of pages of investigative material. The case file represented something more than paperwork. It contained the accumulated history of the investigation. Interviews, leads, evidence, reports, and years of unanswered questions. For the family, it meant another opportunity to look at the case from a different angle. But it also revealed something difficult. The passage of time had not produced an answer. Jennifer was still missing. Then the case entered another phase. In 2022, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement took over the missing person investigation. This was not the beginning of the investigation. It was a new examination of a case that had already consumed years of police work. The task was enormous. Investigators had to work through an old case while asking a modern question. What might have been missed? By May 2025, FDLE said investigators had reviewed thousands of pages of records and spoken with approximately 45 people. More importantly, the agency said it had identified persons of interest and was re-evaluating evidence. FDLE also made clear that it did not consider the case cold. That distinction is important. A case being decades old does not necessarily mean investigators have stopped working it. In Jennifer's case, the investigation was being actively revisited. People were being reconsidered. Old evidence was being re-examined. And new forensic techniques were being considered. For the first time in years, the possibility existed that evidence collected in 2006 could be interpreted differently with technology available decades later. One of the most intriguing developments concerns evidence associated with Jennifer's vehicle. According to reporting on the family's discussions with investigators, additional DNA-related evidence from the car has been undergoing examination, including material that had not previously been tested. But there is an important caveat. The existence of DNA does not automatically mean there is a DNA match. And a DNA profile does not automatically reveal when or why biological material was deposited. A car is touched by its owner. Passengers may touch it. People who service it may touch it. Investigators may touch it. The significance depends on what the evidence is, whose DNA it belongs to, how it got there, and whether it can be connected to the disappearance. So the scientific question is not simply, is there DNA? It is. Whose DNA is it, and what does its presence actually tell investigators? As of 2026, No publicly announced DNA result has identified Jennifer's abductor. The investigation remains active. And then there is the surveillance footage. For nearly 2 decades, that image has remained one of the central mysteries of the case. The person who parked Jennifer's car was caught on camera. But the face remained obscured. Now, technology has changed dramatically. Jennifer's family has explored the use of artificial intelligence to analyze the surveillance footage and potentially extract additional identifying information. The family has particularly focused on physical characteristics visible from the side of the person's head, including the ear. But this is an area where careful language matters. AI enhancement is not the same thing as magically recovering a lost face. An algorithm can analyze patterns and potentially improve usable information. It cannot guarantee that an identity will emerge. And until investigators establish a person's identity through reliable evidence, an AI-generated resemblance remains a lead, not proof. Still, the possibility is significant. Because 20 years ago, investigators were limited by the technology available to them. Today, they have tools that did not exist in 2006. And the Kesse family hopes that somewhere inside those old images is enough information to identify the person who drove Jennifer's car. After 20 years, it is tempting to fill the gaps. To decide who must have done it. To turn a theory into a conclusion. But the evidence does not allow that. What we know is this. Jennifer Kesse was 24 years old when she disappeared from Orlando on January 24, 2006. She was expected at work and did not arrive. Her family reported her missing. Her condominium did not provide investigators with an obvious explanation for her disappearance. Her car was found 2 days later, approximately a mile from her home. Surveillance footage showed an unidentified person parking the vehicle and walking away. Jennifer herself was never found. The FBI continues to list her as missing. And FDLE continues to investigate the case. What we do not know is equally important. We do not know exactly who parked Jennifer's car. We do not know where Jennifer was taken. We do not know who abducted her. We do not know where she is. And despite years of investigation, there has been no publicly announced arrest or conviction for her disappearance. Those are not small gaps. They are the central unanswered questions. January 24, 2026 marked 20 years since Jennifer disappeared. 20 years is long enough for an entire generation to grow up. Long enough for technology to transform. Long enough for buildings to change. Businesses to disappear, memories to fade, and witnesses to move away. But the investigation has not disappeared. FDLE says agents continue to pursue leads, analyze evidence and conduct interviews. The agency's stated priority remains finding Jennifer and bringing justice in the case. And Jennifer's family continues to wait. That may be the hardest part of a disappearance like this. Death can bring unbearable grief, but uncertainty creates something different. A family can be trapped between hope and fear. There is no confirmed grave, no complete timeline, no final explanation, no definitive account of what happened after Jennifer left home. Only fragments. A phone that stopped communicating. A missing car. A surveillance camera. A person whose face was blocked by a fence. And a family that has spent 2 decades trying to turn those fragments into an answer. There is something haunting about the surveillance footage. Not because it shows a crime in progress. It doesn't. It doesn't show Jennifer. It doesn't reveal an assault. It doesn't reveal where she went. It simply shows someone parking a car. And yet, that ordinary-looking moment may sit closer to the truth than almost anything else investigators have. Somewhere inside those seconds is a person who may know what happened to Jennifer. Someone who got into her car, drove it away, parked it, and walked out of view. For 20 years, investigators have tried to understand who that person was. Now, old evidence is being examined with new technology. DNA is being reconsidered. People connected to the investigation are being revisited. And FDLE says the case is still active. But until Jennifer is found, the most important question remains unanswered. What happened after Jennifer Kesse walked out of her home on the morning of January 24, 2006? 20 years later, nobody has publicly been able to answer it. And somewhere in Orlando, the answer may still be waiting inside evidence that investigators already have. Jennifer Kesse remains missing. And the search continues.